Okay, so this is our first mental health mini, and this is since this is our first time doing it, we're definitely working out some kinks today, and both of us are a little nervous to be on camera, so that's fun. So the first thing that I really wanted to do is, this is definitely the right time to do these kinds of things, like these little mini mental health check-ins. And I think it was proof, my first mental health Monday that I put back up, there was 9 people in class right away. So I think it's good that we're kind of starting this back up. So let me first introduce Miss Heather. And I always want to say Macaulay because it doesn't feel right to say your maiden name.
I only changed it because the state made me do it.
Yeah. So Heather is going to be our resident therapist and social worker that's kind of going to chat with me for a couple minutes every Monday. We've been friends for like 15 years now. So we know each other pretty well. And if you want to just go through your credentials so I don't mess those up.
It's fine. It's not. So I'm a clinical social worker. So that means that I just went through the appropriate amount of hours to be able to work with people one-on-one in more of a psychodynamic setting rather than just when you get out of school. I specialize in trauma treatment and mostly with childhood sexual abuse, but really all trauma, adults, physical, sexual, emotional abuse. And that's pretty much it. I mean, I do other things, but that's
I think that's enough. Yeah. I think you do enough. And really specifically, I just wanted to put this out there because I know that so many of us are kind of identifying this way now. As Heather also works a lot with LGBTQ+, so she's pretty familiar with that. And I'm biased, but I think that she's a wonderful social worker and therapist. So the first practice that we did on the 20th, Monday night, we were talking about really being in survival mode. And I know that I've been in survival mode and kind of like fight or flight mode since March, I think, and probably before that because I have, panic disorder. But I definitely switched right into it in once, everything shut down, once we got into the pandemic. And I've been feeling myself like right before I go to bed, I'm on my phone. The second that I wake up, I'm on my phone. I find myself just kind of like endlessly scrolling all day. I'm like constantly doing stuff to distract myself. And I recognize that that's kind of it's definitely a trauma response. So I really wanted to focus on getting out of that survival mode, getting out of that like doom scrolling and doing anything that we possibly can to distract ourselves, and how to really feel your feelings instead, because that's what it is at the end of the day, is we're distracting ourselves from feeling, because it's gross, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So really the first question that I had was, how do we get ourselves out of that fight or flight mode? Like, how do we get ourselves to feel safe and like it's okay to relax for a little bit and it's okay to feel your feelings? And I know that yoga is definitely one tool that a lot of us use. But from, a therapist point of view, how we get ourselves to kind of feel a little bit safer and get out of that mindset a little bit.
Yeah. So it's hard, right? So it's really hard and can often feel impossible. But the first thing is going to be really is identifying what you're doing to avoid it, right? So you're saying that you're scrolling through Instagram, you're scrolling through social media, you're probably waking up and checking the news, and so what ends up happening there is you're creating stressors, right? By taking in information that is overwhelming, and then also trying to avoid it at the same time by continuing to scroll.
Right.
So you're kind of creating this feedback loop for yourself, and we all do it, I think we all do it differently. But it's a coping mechanism and it's avoidance. So the first thing really to do is to recognize what you're doing right? Because if you know you're doing it, then you can sit with yourself for a minute and say, okay, this is what I'm doing, but why am I doing it?
Why?
And what am I avoiding?
Right.
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 And that's honestly the first step. And that's very uncomfortable. And a lot of people aren't always ready to do that, because then that
Yeah.
means you have to recognize that there is a problem. And not
Right.
a problem like this huge issue, but just like a problem for yourself that you're not functioning the most effectively, right?
Right.
Or the most healthy way.
Right. And really, I never even thought of the fact that we're making this kind of loop for ourselves that, especially with like, the election and everything, that I was constantly like, wake up, check the news, middle of the day, check the news, go right before bed, check the news. And I was like, why am I so anxious? Because, you're creating extra stress for yourself on top of what you haven't felt and what you haven't processed. So the second thing, I mean, really addressing like, right now, I feel like everybody has this, like, I keep calling it a backlog of unprocessed emotion because of all this like collective trauma that we're going through, and because of, allowing ourselves to just kind of zone out and distract as much as possible. And I know that you took practice this Monday, and I think that was that your first experience with like restorative and yin or taken?
Yeah.
So I just really wanted to like go into how yoga allows us to kind of address like this backlog of unprocessed emotion, and specifically yin and restorative yoga, because you're kind of sitting with yourself for 5 minutes at a time in these uncomfortable postures. I feel like a lot of feelings. So I don't know if you felt any of that in the first practice at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I'm sure it's more complicated than just you're being forced to be calm. You know what I mean? But I know that those types of longer poses where you're forced to stop and you're forced to really sit with yourself, like even shavasana at the end, shavasana at the end. I used to say savasana, so I'm going.
So we're doing it. We're two Long Island
we're fine
ladies who are
I know that like that, especially for a lot of trauma therapists. I know other trauma practitioners who obviously take yoga as a self-care thing, and even that for them releases the emotion of other people. So it's other people's, so if you're releasing other people's trauma through your own practice, of course you're going to release your own, right? And so since you really are just forcing yourself to be present with your feelings, I mean, the backlog is going to, and that's a really good way to put it, because we all kind of have this.
Yeah, there's stuff there that we just haven't addressed ever.
Yeah.
Or haven't addressed properly.
Yeah, and especially with this whole year has been like a textbook definition of complex trauma, right? Or CPTSD, which is where you are traumatized, but you're having, complex trauma is where you're traumatized, but you're constantly being traumatized. So like you're not getting the opportunity for it to stop. Right. And that's kind of what's been going on this year. So we're all developing, and for different reasons for everybody, but we're all feeling it. So you have this backlog that you've created. And so I imagine, and I don't know that much about yoga, but I imagine that depending on the practice and depending on the poses and depending on, the positions that you're in, we hold trauma and we hold emotion in different parts of our body that I do.
Oh, yeah.
So, so for last Monday, it was a lot of like hips and lower back. So that I would imagine for some people probably brought up a lot of old, if there exists, maybe sexual trauma or, even just like tension, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be like trauma in the sense of like, a rape or, anything, or, anything like that, but just like, pelvic floor tension, pelvic floor, anxiety, pelvic, all of these things. So that'll come up.
Right.
So I would say kind of like go with what comes up.
Yeah.
I
think because that was going to be my final question is like, once we because this is something that, you know, it's therapists and yoga teachers all over the place are like, well, feel your feelings. And it's like, what do you mean? A lot of people don't understand that expression of like,
Yeah.
feel your feelings. It's like, well, what can you do to feel your feelings? And yoga is one thing, meditation is another thing, but I feel like just putting things down, drop what you're doing.
Yeah.
And take the time to really, all right, this is an uncomfortable emotion that's come up, and not even to just explore it completely, but to acknowledge it. And
That's it.
like, yeah, I feel like acknowledging it is like the biggest thing. And even just to like out loud to yourself be like, I'm feeling this. That's something that I've started to do, and I've realized like the more that I like vocalize it and get it out of my body, which is really what yoga does for us too, is gets it out of our body, the better I feel about it. And not just that you're totally releasing it, but it's also like, I don't know, you're allowing yourself to acknowledge that thought or that feeling so that you can explore it a little bit deeper. Does that make sense?
Completely. So like if I say to you, you know, Kate, don't think about a big purple elephant.
Right.
Don't, you know, like, and then I just keep saying, don't think about it, don't think about it, you know, like whatever. You're
Yeah.
only going to think about it, and you're going to find yourself probably obsessing about it because I'm telling you not to do it. Right. So then it becomes this kind of like taboo thing where you're like, well, I'm being told not to. So like now I can't stop myself, you know?
Right.
And it's the same thing. So like we, you know, we don't want to feel our feelings, especially the overwhelming ones, because they suck. They're uncomfortable.
Yeah, they're gross.
Yeah, gross. And they bring up nasty stuff a lot of times, and it's easier to just push it down and ignore it. But then you're not.
It isn't.
Right. And then it becomes the elephant, right? So then you're finding yourself kind of like obsessing about it, or it'll come out in dreams because you're not allowing yourself to think about it when you're awake. So it comes out in your dreams. But so the best way to start the whole feel your feelings thing, which is kind of just like, you know, it's obnoxious to have people say that to you. You know, like I say it to people too, and I'm like, ugh, that's so annoying, because it's like, you know, what does that mean?
What do you mean?
So what that means is, you know, something's going on, you're triggered, whatever, right? Or you're having a feeling, you say to yourself, like you said, oh, I'm feeling sad. This made me sad. I'm feeling guilty. I'm feeling, you know, anxious. I'm feeling whatever. And what ends up happening is the minute that you allow yourself to feel it and you allow yourself to think about it, it takes away the pressure of it. It takes away the you know, and it goes away. It doesn't go away, but it like minimizes. So if you think about it as if, I tell this a lot to like little kids because it's a good visual, but it works for everybody. If you think about like when
we all are little kids when you think about it. So
that's a whole other thing we can talk about too. But you know, you think about like laying on the grass and like looking at the clouds, and you think about like, okay, like how long does it take for, if you see one cloud over here, for it to come across and then leave your vision? That's how much time you give yourself for that feeling.
That's actually fascinating, because that's the visual I use a lot in Shavasana or in meditation, when you say like, picture your thoughts like clouds.
And that's it. So, you know, right. So you're giving yourself permission to feel your feelings. You're also giving yourself permission to stop. So you're saying to yourself, like, I'm feeling this really overwhelming sense of grief, and it's really uncomfortable, and I don't want to deal with it, but I know that I have to. So I'm going to sit here with it for, I don't know, what would that be, 45 seconds? You know what I mean? Like, you let yourself feel it, and it'll peak and it'll feel like shit, and then it'll start to go down and it will pass, and, you know, it'll go away more and more over time. Because you're allowing yourself to feel it instead of just pushing it down, and then it becomes this like big, awful.
Yeah. And then when you do eventually deal with it, it's going to be a bigger deal.
Yeah. And it's going to be so much worse and so much more complicated and so much more traumatic to bring it back up.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I think that's that'll be the end for our first little mental health mini here. I'd like to thank Miss Heather for being with us and taking time away from her little one and hanging out for a few minutes. Make sure you join us for the next Mental Health Monday. They're every Monday at 7 p.m. They're donation based, so whatever you can offer is perfectly fine with me. We'll put more information in the captions here as well. So thank you all.